Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bleav in Bengals podcast presented by FanDuel. I'm your host, Solomon Wilcots, joined by our Cincinnati Bengals insider, Charlie Goldsmith. Charlie, how you doing today, my friend?
How's it going?
Hey, look, it's going great. I'm enjoying watching playoff football. And my heart's breaking a little bit because I'd rather be rooting for the Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Burrow as they make another run. And the fact that we're absent from the playoffs for the third consecutive season, it really got me to thinking because I'm watching the wild card round, the playoffs. They're so exciting, so exhilarating, so much on the line. It's a do or die sort of consequence as a result of these games. But I wanted to ask you, as you watch these games, when you talk about our team, the Cincinnati Bengals, and our window of being close to getting back in, are we closer to getting back into the playoffs? Are we much further away based on what you're seeing amongst this collection of playoff teams?
Well, two teams who advanced and who are highly ranked in their conference that we saw win this weekend with the Bears and with the Patriots. And I truly believe that even with Joe Flacco starting at quarterback and even with Jamar Chase missing the Patriots game, I truly believe the Bengals should have won those games. The ceiling that the offense still has, combined with just how I saw these teams stack up head to head, gives me the belief that the Bengals aren't that far away. Of course, when you add Burrow into that, you go into every game feeling very confident about where you stand. So there isn't an AFC powerhouse that I see. So the gap between the Bengals and the top of the conference isn't as high as it could or should be. But still, of course, the gap between the Bengals and the playoffs is farther than it's been in a few years.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I think I'm going to go the other way. If we're using comparative teams, I don't think the Cincinnati Bengals played well enough to beat the Chicago Bears. They scored 40-plus points on offense, but, man, defensively, they gave up nearly 50 points to a rookie quarterback, our second-year quarterback in Caleb Williams, but a rookie head coach who's paired with a quarterback. The Bears are better now than they were then, and I think they're going to be better year two under Ben Johnson than they were in year one. Clearly, their ability to come from behind and win games, they showed that at Paycor Stadium when they came from behind to beat Cincinnati Bengals, but we could not stop that offense. We couldn't stop. I mean, it was worse than the Green Bay Packers, right? who gave up, 31 points and ended up losing the game because they can't stop Caleb Williams in those final minutes. Well, we couldn't stop them. We gave up 49 points. And then with the New England Patriots, they had players who were missing that day. They had injuries. They had some guys who were missing, no doubt. And by all accounts, I remember listening to the post-game press conference from Mike Vrabel. He thought that his team just didn't bring it that day. But look, they still found a way to win. And that was the thing they touted, that we could be lackadaisical and not bring our A game, but yet we still won the game. That's what the Patriots were saying after that game. And, for them to come into Paycor Stadium and beat the Bengals twice in a year where they won, 4 or 5 games, and then in a season where they had only 4 losses. So either way, they have proven to be able to go head-to-head with the Bengals and still come away with a win. I cannot give them more credit than that. I'm not saying that those games weren't competitive, because they certainly were. But at the end of the day, the Patriots found a way to win. The Chicago Bears found a way to win. And we found that to be sort of a trend here over the last couple of.
The story of the season, of course, was how much the Bengals struggled finishing games as a whole. But when I look at a bunch of those individual moments, I just saw a lack of talent on the defense, for lack of a better term. I went back through the Bears game last week, and on the final drive where the Bears won the game, on the field you had Oren Burks, Josh Newton, and your pass rushing defensive tackles were Cam Sample and Chris Jenkins. And I believe you had Cam Taylor-Britt, who is struggling at cornerback as well. This was a team that wasn't deep enough, that didn't have enough talent at the top of its roster. So when it came down to closing time, they just had guys who shouldn't have been in those spots. And we'll keep going back to the theme of they have to keep adding to this roster to have more talent when they're in those spots next season.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that here in a couple of questions, because I want to get to that and not necessarily the assessment, but what needs to be done moving forward and how the roster can be improved. And that means look, I've been on social media reading the articles and the Cincinnati Bengals fan base and their response, which is kind of typical. I think you find that across the league, even with some of these playoff teams. Their head coach, they're one and done in Green Bay. Now people want Matt LaFleur's job. In Baltimore, they didn't make the playoffs for the sixth time in 18 years under Harbaugh, and now they wanted him gone. Mike Tomlin can sneeze, and people want him fired in Pittsburgh. So, but I do think having your finger on the pulse for the fan base, I do believe is very important. So, there are fans who responded. They wanted action from the Bengals office and didn't like the fact that the front office decided to bring back Director of Personnel Duke Tobin and the head coach Zach Taylor. I want you to make a case for why the Bengals were right in bringing them back.
What the Bengals need to do, we all know, is fix the defense. And the big question is, can these guys do it? But last year was a prime example of the turnover that we saw from a defensive coordinator perspective, from a coaching staff perspective. There were so many moving pieces. Also, you had the Jamar and Trey negotiations. There were so many moving pieces that kind of took away from what the focus of last offseason needed to be, which was fixing the defense. So, while you can make the case for a change, I'd say that they need to kind of keep the focus on the priority. And as opposed to making these wholesale changes with unexpected ripple effects that might even take away from your offense and the strength you have on offense, keeping continuity helps keep this offseason as simple as possible for the Bengals.
Look, I'm going to keep this as simple as I can. I think when in doubt, and we've heard it said, and we all know it to be true, when in doubt, think players, not plays. Think about the guys who are on the field, not the guys who are coaching or the guys who are scouting or the guys who own the team. This has always been a game where the coaches have all the power but no control because they can't make one tackle. They can't throw the pass. They can't catch the ball. They can't block. Players are the lifeblood of this league. They are the product. They're the guys who get it done. Think about who Zach Taylor was in 2019, his first year as the head coach here. Okay? Think about who he was in 2020 when Joe Burrow arrived. Think about who he was in 2021 when Joe Burrow arrived with some experience. Okay? So that you got three different levels of production from between 2019, 2020, and 2021. Same coach, different player, though. Right? From 2019 to 2020. He was even a different player in 2021 than he had been the year before. You want to know what the big jump is, the big quantum leap in production? It's the players. So look, when it defaults, when it don't go well, go back to the players and say, hey, man, you got to perform better. You absolutely. And so this time last year, we lulled ourselves, at least I wasn't on board with this. We lulled ourselves into this false belief that it was all Lou Anarumo's fault, right? That if only Lou Anarumo could coach better, that the defense would be better and it wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have missed the playoffs. But I've had so many coaches who tell me, it's funny how the better players I get, all of a sudden I become a better coach. You give me better players, I become a better coach. And the same is going to be true for Al Golden. We're going to get, if we get him better players, he'll become a better coach. Lou Anarumo was a better coach in Indy because he had what? Better players on that defense until they got hurt. Travarius Ward gets hurt. Sauce Gardner can't even finish the season. But at the end of the day, it's about the players. And so we have to begin to think about getting better players in the draft and in free agency. You cannot miss. You simply, particularly when you're paying your quarterback and paying your receivers, like the Kansas City Chiefs, you got to hit on these draft picks. You got to hit in free agent acquisitions. You cannot be trading even. You cannot have to go ask them to take a pay cut after the first year because you think they didn't perform so well. But yet you fired the coach who was coaching them. You didn't give him really a good product. So that leads me to this question. Bengals players who are expected to hit the free agent market, who've been on the roster, by the way, for the last year or two. Trey Hendrickson's expected to hit the free agent market. Cam Taylor-Britt, Joseph Osai, Geno Stone, all four of those guys begin the year as starters. Offensive guard Cordell Volson, Lucas Patrick, who only came over after 1 year, and Dalton Reisner. All three of those guys have been starters for the Bengals. Let's start with Trey Hendrickson. What's the likelihood that he and the Bengals will be parting ways this offseason?
Yeah, it seems pretty likely that a parting ways will happen. Just even reading into what Duke Tobin and Zach Taylor said about Trey when asked, and how much their tone was different compared to what it was last season, how much, the Bengals kind of got an opportunity during the second half of the year without Trey to move on to a different generation of the defense. And just also building off that idea, like, this is a rebuilding defense. It's a defense that's getting younger, and you want to kind of build what your next wave and next iteration is going to be, as opposed to hoping you get one more year out of a guy who's been great for you in the past. So I expect the Bengals to be active in the free agent market for a new defensive end. But Hendrickson seems like it's run its course.
Yeah, a really good point. How about at the cornerback position? Cam Taylor-Britt, as you well know, came over as a second-round pick in 2022, and early in his career, this guy looked like he was an ascending star in our league, not just in that locker room, made big plays. And then over the last couple of years, it's been the reverse. And I don't know exactly what's happening there. I wish I did, but I have an affinity for him. I tend to like him as a player. And with recent reports is that he recently, had to serve a week because of reckless driving. And so where are the Bengals at with him, and how likely are we to go heavy in the market at the cornerback position, considering how young we are there, and how, other than DJ Turner, we really have yet to get the results they've been looking for based on the kind of resources they've used to try to fill those positions?
One of the takeaways from the second half of the season is they view Dax Hill now as a starting outside corner. So much so that it wouldn't even surprise me if extension talks take place between the Bengals and Dax Hill this offseason. So I get the sense they're heading into 2026 with DJ and Dax as their outside duo. That would leave an open spot in the slot. Cam Taylor-Britt been an outside corner for his entire career. Maybe just not as much of a fit in Cincinnati anymore, unless he'd want to come back on a prove-it deal, but then he'd still just be a fourth corner. So the Bengals will be looking in the slot. We can talk schematically. I'll be really interested to see if it'd be some sort of safety slot hybrid to kind of get with the times with how defenses are evolving around the NFL, or whether or not they just try to get a true old school, old-fashioned slot corner to fill the starting spot they have up for grabs there. Maybe that's just bringing back Jalen Davis. But Cam Taylor-Britt just didn't quite work out. And then Dax Hill kind of Wally pipped him.
Yeah, kind of the Wally pip. Look, I can tell you now, I'm on record for saying this in 2024 and even last year going into the 2025 draft, because I think you got to always be adding in your secondary. And I'm not saying it's got to be in the first round, but that position is so hard, it's so technical. And it requires smarts, it requires experience, it requires poise. And as Dick LeBeau said, when you make mistakes on the back end in your secondary in a game, the official is holding up two hands signaling a touchdown. You have to be so good. You got to grade out over 90% in your secondary. In a league where you're playing about 65 snaps per game, if you made a mistake on 10% of your plays at each position, where there's so that's six plays where you have a bad play at each position. So look, 4 times 6 is 24. You have 4 bad plays. You're going to be struggling, right? You're going to really be struggling to win games. That's how perfect you have to be in the back end of your secondary. So you cannot allow a lot of mistakes. So you got to always be in the market. 2024. I wanted them to select Cooper DeJean from the University of Iowa because I thought he was perfect. We wouldn't be looking for a nickel. The guy just made All-Pro, by the way. We passed on him. Quinion Mitchell, just out of Toledo, just made All-Pro in his second year after 2 years. We passed on him. And Xavier Watts, who it was a no-brainer that would have been the gift to give Al Golden from the University, from Notre Dame, right? That played in this defense, would have come already with some knowledge of what our defense coordinator wants to do. And we passed on those guys, Charlie. So I'm not playing Monday morning quarterback here. I was saying this going into both of those drafts. And now here we are still looking for those kinds of players.
Now, the problem is, as we relitigate, the last 5 years of Bengals football, is they had too many needs. They needed a human being to start at guard. They needed a human being to start at linebacker. They needed a human being to start at offensive tackle. And I like a lot of these players that they took with these draft for need picks, but then when you get pigeonholed in the draft, you're not set up to have your best possible drafts. And there's so many missed opportunities like you alluded to.
Oh, man. See, now you're getting me going here, Charlie. You're getting me. Any team that drafts solely on needs need to be put out of business. I'm telling you, you need to shut it down. Because I'm going to share this with you. And I've had this conversation with the great Ozzie Newsome. Might have heard of him.
Yep.
Multiple Executive of the Year award winner, former player, by the way, who knows the game, has drafted players. He drafted Jonathan Ogden, Ray Lewis in the same draft. Ray Lewis didn't go at the top of the first round. He went in the bottom of the first round. So did Ed Reed. They're two Hall of Famers, right, that went in the 20s. He said sometimes when you get to drafting for need, you end up passing up on other good players. But if you draft for best player available, the worst thing that you could ever do is end up with a roster full of really good football players.
Yeah.
And you'll find a way to play them. You'll find a way to get them on the field. He said, too many people get caught up into their needs. And I could cite you an example. This year we drafted Billy Price from The Ohio State University at center. They wanted to get Frank Ragnow. The Detroit Lions, ahead of the Bengals, took Frank Ragnow. You know what the Bengals did? They didn't scan the landscape to say, who's the best football player out there we could draft? They were like, we're ignoring that. We need a center. And they passed on other good football players to go get Billy Price.
Yeah.
Which was a disastrous pick. I'm not going to even talk about the Cedric Aboye pick. I'm not going to even talk about the Jonah Williams. Drafting on need has gotten this organization into a lot of trouble because you got your need, and then when that guy don't turn out to be the guy you thought he was, it's doubly dangerous because you passed on a really good football player who could be helping you win games, and you're always going to need good football players, by the way. So when you talk to me about need, I think sometimes trying to thread the needle on these picks is where they have missed big time. We need a corner. Let's go get this one guy. Well, you need a lot of those other positions too, especially if they're really good and they're difference makers. Right now, you know this. The Bengals don't have real leadership on the defense. They don't have any dogs who can say, hey, guys, enough of this. Hey, where are those guys? But if you put that as part of the scope of what you're looking for, and put that on the scale and how you're weighing and measuring players, you're going to find out by looking towards those things and also filling needs. Because I do think you could do both at the same time, but you can't just go strictly based on needs. I have another question for you, by the way. I'm watching the LA Rams in the playoffs. Wasn't that long ago, the Bengals and the Rams were playing in the Super Bowl 2021. We went back to the playoffs the next year in 2022 and haven't been back since. The Rams are there every year. They were supposed to have mortgaged their future to get the Von Millers, the Odell Beckham Jr.'s, and the Jalen Ramseys, all who played in that Super Bowl. And all they do is go get a Puka Nacua in the 5th round. All they do is go get a Devontae Adams a little bit later. Why has their window remained open to be in the playoffs at a perennial level, at a perennial pace? And our trajectory has gone the other way. How has that happened, Charlie?
They've made really savvy and smart moves in draft picks across the defense, but the ones I'll highlight especially are what they did last year in the draft to pick Jared Verse and Braden Fisk. And having a duo like that up front and how those guys set the tone and then schematically the way they're used, that's the engine of the Rams defense. And that's pretty powerful. and, gives them a higher ceiling than the Bengals have. Of course, Trey Hendrickson has been more productive than the two of them, but Trey never had a partner like that over the last couple of years in Cincinnati. And then, of course, Trey wasn't around for most of this season. The Bengals have been missing that pass rush juice. The Rams restocked it when they lost Von Miller and Aaron Donald in the draft, and now they're back reloaded and firing on all cylinders.
They have moved on from some really good players too, and yet they've been able to replace and rebuild through the draft. Les Snead, who's doing a wonderful job as the general manager of that team. Obviously, Sean McVay is part of the developmental phase of developing players. You look at the tight ends, Cody Parkinson, that catch he made for the game-winning touchdown of 19 yards was a dime thrown by Matthew Stafford. So we're seeing two teams who were playing in the Super Bowl, 4 years ago? 5 years ago, and yet both teams have gone in different directions. Both teams are paying their quarterback a lot of money. Both teams are paying wide receivers a lot of money, but yet you got to hit on the drafts. You got to hit on those draft picks, and it can't always be a first-round pick. The Rams haven't had any first-round picks, and when they did have them, that's when they took Fisk and Jarrett Verse, and bang, they hit it out of the park. One guy was defensive rookie of the year, 1 year ago. And one guy led the league in receiving this year, Puka Nacua, who was a 5th-round pick. So that's what we're talking about, and that's why that leads me to this. Duke Tobin was asked a question by Paul Dehner Jr. of The Athletic recently during his interview with Duke Tobin, and asked him about the scouting size, the size of the Bengals scouting department. As you well know, the Bengals are notorious. They have the smallest scouting department of any team in the NFL. They have 6 to 8 full-time scouts. And typically an NFL team would average anywhere between 20 to 25 full-time scouts. And when asked about rethinking the size of the scouting department, here's what Duke Tobin had to say to Paul Dehner Jr. Our scouting staff is, in my opinion, the size that it is because I think that the collaboration is better at that size. We have never lacked for information on a player. There's never been a player selected that we didn't know anything about. There's never been a player selected that we didn't have multiple reports and a large background on. It's not about the volume of information we have. If we make mistakes, it's because at that decision point, we made the wrong decision. But it wasn't because we didn't have information on the player. We have information. We have plenty of opinions on the player. We made a lot of good picks. I get that people don't believe we've made any good picks. We've made a lot of good picks on our roster currently and on parts of our roster. And there will be more in the future. I really believe that. Look, nobody bats 1,000. I totally agree. They have made some good picks. They made some bad picks. Just that recently, we haven't seen the fruits of any good picks outside of the first and second round, Charlie. Please tell me I'm wrong. Point me out our last significant difference maker that we drafted outside of the first round and our last real big difference maker that we signed in free agency on this football team.
What I'm really interested to see, and we might never really get these answers, but the Bengals kind of did make some changes kind of last summer to their front office. They added 2 scouts as they kind of had, they lost Christian Sarkisian to Northwestern. They added 2 scouts and they added a full-time analytics expert to their scouting staff, which is a position that hadn't existed before. So if I could be a fly,
needed to happen, by the way. That needed to happen. Yeah.
So if I could be a fly on the wall in those meetings and figure out what are the different viewpoints, what are the different pieces of information and skill sets that those 3 new faces in particular bring to the staff, I think you'll have your answer about, is there change? Are these new guys doing very different things, or is it just more of the same structure that we had? But again, kind of my big question is how much of a shakeup are these new faces in terms of the ideas and the perspectives they're bringing to the staff, and how much of an impact can these 3 new pieces of a small front office make going forward?
So these aren't additional hires. These were replacement hires. Let's be clear.
They lost 1 and replaced and added 3.
Okay, they added 3. So here's what been my experience. And I've been in all 32 NFL buildings. I've spent a lot of time with scouts. And sometimes you do better spending time outside of the building with them, particularly at the combine and at different, at college campuses when I'm going to pro days and I'm working with them. It's been my experience that many of the scouts that you hired by a team, and you do need some uniformity. You do need to fit in the paradigm of how that team operates. But I do think new blood into any organization is always good. A new way of seeing things and a new way of looking at things. And that approach, I think, is so very important. I think Marvin Lewis brought that to the team. I don't know that that's appreciated enough because he was really heavily involved in personnel. Remember, in those days, they selected guys like Geno Atkins in the 4th round. They got guys like Carlos Dunlap in the 3rd round. They were getting difference makers outside of the 1st and 2nd rounds. And I think that's how you really can critically judge how good of a job you're doing, because you don't get to always pick in the 1st and 2nd round, Charlie. But more importantly, once you're there, how long do you get washed over and doing things the way that they want you to do, seeing things the way they want? And at some point you lose your voice. You lose the ability to make an impact or pull people outside of their comfort zones. This is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. And where was our last point of discovery? And that's why I'm still asking, where are the big finds? Hey, I'm listening to Duke. Those words sound really good, and I want to believe them. But the proof is in the pudding, and the hard questions have to be asked. When was the last time you found a player in free agency that was a difference maker outside of Trey Hendrickson 5 years ago when you signed? When was the last player that you drafted outside the 1st or 2nd round that was a difference maker in that locker room and on that football team? That's the question. It ain't a hard one to ask or answer.
The results are 6-11. You know what I mean? Like the way to judge that is your record, and 9-8, 9-8, 6-11, 3 consecutive years not making the playoffs kind of tell you everything you need to know about the hit rate not being high enough with so many of those big investments.
Kevin Byard, by the way, once again led the league in interceptions with 7 picks, right? He's playing for the Chicago Bears. You may have heard of him. Do you know he was a 3rd round pick from Middle Tennessee? This is why you need more than 8 scouts. This is why you need more. If the other team has 25 and you got 8, I guarantee you they're covering more ground than you. You can say, well, we got the same information. No, you don't. There's no proof in that. There's no proof that your 8 guys had the same information as their 20. In fact, those teams didn't even give you their information. What team shares their information with another team? So that statement on its face does not ring true to me. I could hear you saying it. I see you saying it. It sounds good. But the weight of it does not carry significance with me, because when was the last time we've drafted that kind of player outside of the 1st round? Other teams are doing it. I'll stop there. But I'm reading these words. They don't ring. They ring hollow. I'm just going to be real here, because I go by what I see. And that's pretty much it. It's been great, Charlie. We got to get going. You're always the best, my friend. Want to thank you for joining us here on the Bleav in Bengal podcast presented by FanDuel. We're going to catch up with everyone next week. And I might be on fire about something else. Stick around, so don't forget to join us.